Well, our big focus, Iran is seemingly downplaying Israel's long-anticipated retaliatory strikes, as many have pointed out. Described by the Israel Defense Forces as precise strikes, Tehran has so far avoided pledging a definitive response to Saturday's attack, as the country's regime faces both a challenging economy and a fight over its future leadership, as per analysts. Israel's strike, though, killed 4 soldiers and seems to have targeted military sites. As far as the reaction from the United States is concerned, Joe Biden has said he hoped this marked the end in escalatory actions between Israel and Iran, as the White House seeks to revert the conflict to a shadow war and not an overt war, as per some Middle East and US analysts. We have reactions lined up for you. Listen in.
قدرت و توانایی و ابتکار و اراده ملت ایران رو هنوز درست نتوانستن بفهمن. این رو ما باید به اینها بفهمونیم. کیفیت کار رو مسئولین ما باید تشخیص بدن و درست بفهمن و اون چی که صلاح این کشور و این ملت هست اون رو انجام بدن.
מי שפוגע בנו, אנחנו פוגעים בו. זהו העיקרון שהנחה אותנו עד היום, וזה העיקרון שינחה אותנו גם בהמשך הדרך. התקיפה באיראן הייתה מדויקת ועוצמתית, והשיגה את כל מטרותיה.
Well, Iran's leadership has said it is weighing a response to this weekend's Israeli airstrikes, as the country has called on the UN Security Council to meet today. Joining us for further clarity, Dr. Reza Khanzadeh, Middle East expert and Iran analyst. Also on the broadcast with us, geopolitical analyst Irina Sukuman. Thank you so much for making time for us on NDTV. Dr. Reza, to you first. Now, some reports citing sources have highlighted that Israel's retaliatory strike against Iran took out a critical component in Iran's ballistic missile program. In fact, the mixers, they're highly sophisticated equipment that Iran cannot produce on its own, is what we're hearing, and they need to purchase it from China. Dr. Reza, has this been a huge blow for Iran?
Thanks for having me. To phrase it as a huge blow, I think that remains to be seen. But as far as the data that we have seen thus far, especially from the types of open source analysis that is currently going on and ongoing, it does seem to be a significant blow to the regime. We have to keep in mind that, like you said, Iran is very limited in the number of ballistic missiles and most military types of equipment that they have, with all the sanctions that are imposed on them, and also their main backer militarily being Russia, also in a war with Ukraine. They have very limited access to the amount of ballistic missiles that they typically would have. So with these strikes by Israel, it does set them back for a number of years, I believe, for them to kind of regain and get back to where they are now. At the best, I think they have about over 3,000 short-term ballistic missiles that can't reach Israel. So, yeah, this would be a significant blow. Now, as far as a huge blow, we would have to wait and see, because a long-term strategy, I think, for Iran would be not so much attacks from Iran, but kind of re-strengthening and regrowing Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, and using their proxies more, moving forward.
Well, it has then definitely dealt a significant blow to Iran, as you've both highlighted. But Dr. Reza, if we go by the latest polling that's been conducted by the Middle East Institute, that clearly shows that public support for Iran's costly foreign policy is now fragile.
Yeah, absolutely. The Islamic Republic is being stretched thin to a point where their own survival now could be at risk. There's even very faint whispers and rumors that Supreme Leader of Iran, Khamenei, is terminally ill, and he may have maybe a year, maybe less, depending on the types of medical treatment that he gets.
Right.
So if we take that into consideration, also the continued domestic problems that plague the regime, with almost monthly protests in opposition to the regime, And also, with these strikes by Israel, going back to what we were saying earlier, this really puts Iran essentially in a box, if you will, where on the one hand they have to show strength, or else they'll seem weak. But in order to show strength, it'll make them weaker because they have a finite number of missiles, ballistic missiles, what have you, and they're playing essentially a war of attrition with it, against Israel, to where Israel is backed by the United States, where there's essentially unlimited military capabilities, and Iran is essentially backed by Russia, perhaps China, but I doubt China will really step in to kind of pick up the gap where it is from Russia. So essentially Iran is going to run out essentially of that type of military capability. So they may show strength now in the short term, but this type of regime does not stay in power for almost 50 years without calculating that long-term strategy. So I think because they're stretched thin at this point, regionally, domestically, internationally, with the sanctions and the loss of so much military capabilities, I think they're going to be a bit more strategic if they do retaliate against Israel, which I doubt they will. Like I said, I think they're going to start playing a more mid to long term type of strategy.
Right. The role that the United States is playing on ground zero. But thanks so much, Irina Sukuman, as always, for joining us, and Dr. Reza Khanzadeh for joining us with your assessment.